Hello everybody. In this video we are going to find out whether the Victrix Pro BFG controller is good for fighting games. And here's the box that it comes in. This guy works on the PS5, PS4, and PC. It comes in this nice looking case right here. Super long braided cable. The controller itself. The controller is both wired and wireless. Here's the dongle. You can plug this into your PC or the PS5 and it'll work. Not a lot of controllers do this, but I like this a lot. These are 8-way gates for your joysticks. Here's the 6-button fight pad. I've never seen a controller package that has 3 D-pads. That's kinda nuts. We have a longer joystick cap and we have a convex stick cap. And you may be wondering, what the heck is this screwdriver doing here? Check this out. If you don't already know, this controller is modular. You can switch the positions of the D-pad and the joystick on the left hand side here, and you can swap this guy out for a 6-button fight pad. However, unlike other Pro controllers where they use magnets to switch these modules out, these are switched out by unscrewing them the old-fashioned way. There you go. And you put this in, and you screw it back in. I personally don't love this design, to be honest with you, because I go back and forth a lot. I do like the 6-button fight pad for maybe Street Fighter, but for other types of fighting games, I prefer this guy. Switching back and forth between the two is such a pain. It's very disappointing that this is not magnetic. If you've seen pictures of this controller, it looks badass, right? It looks nice. However, as soon as you pick it up, you're gonna notice that this thing is super light and it flexes a little bit, and the color accents really make this thing look like a toy. And these being screws instead of magnets just add to the cheap feeling of the controller. I'm not sure if you remember Pelican. Pelican was a cheap third-party controller company, and I've bought a few controllers from them. They all just feel super cheap, and that's the same feeling that I had when I picked this controller up. The grips on the handles are nice though, I like that. There's rubbery textures on the back of the handle, also very nice in the front as well. Very grippy. For a controller that costs this much, this guy is 180 bucks. You would expect them to use some more premium materials, you know? I'm gonna be honest with you, when I first picked this up, I was really worried about how it plays just because of how cheaply everything look and feel. Fortunately for us, there's some good stuff in here. Let's check them out. Let's start off by talking about the 6-button fight pad here. The buttons themselves are really nice. They're quite a bit bigger than your normal buttons. They're spaced out quite nicely where you can press 2 buttons at once without accidentally hitting the other buttons. As nice as these buttons are, I have a problem of where they're placed. Notice that the square and the X buttons is all the way down here, and there's an empty space here with the fight pad logo. This whole thing here needs to be shifted up and to the right, I would say about 3 or 4 centimeters, and get rid of this fight pad logo. First of all, why is there an empty space here at all? The reason for this is because of these damn screws. So if you scoot it up, it's gonna hit the screws. That's why they have to shift these buttons down here. This leaves an empty space, and they have to add this logo here to make it not look awkward. Had this thing been magnetic, we wouldn't have this problem. Because of this downshift, your thumb is gonna have a lot of trouble hitting the square button. After long sessions, your thumb is gonna get hella tired. Now you may say, well, why don't you just play claw? Alrighty, so here's claw. Check this out though. This handle is right here, and it's right at the place where it blocks your palm from reaching the claw position. This is really awkward. Now, had these things been moved up here, I can go around it, but I can't right now. Look at this. The positioning of this 6-button fight pad is all bad, and it's all due to these screws. The buttons themselves are great. It's just a shame that they cannot be in the right spot. Another thing about this 6-button fight pad is the R2 button, which is supposed to replicate the right trigger. So I'm on PC right now, and it works perfectly. However, on the PS5, does not work. But R1 works. Look at that. Nothing. Fortunately, the R2 button does work for Street Fighter on PS5. I'm not sure why this button works on some games and doesn't work on others. Let me tell you, I was so excited to get this controller because of the 6-button module here. Is it usable? Yes, but it's very disappointing that it's not better. Alright, let's talk about the 4-button layout here. These buttons are a lot smaller than these. And they're actually also smaller than your regular Xbox controller buttons. These buttons are tiny. And the reason for this is, again, these screws. The modules here cannot be any bigger. If they're any bigger, they're gonna run into the screws. Fortunately though, these buttons are great. They're very tactile and clicky. I'm not sure what kind of switch they use for this guy, but it feels very much like an Xbox metal switch. It's not quite as clicky and it's not quite as loud, but it's pretty close. But most importantly, they're placed in a place where it's easily accessible. You're not going to strain your thumb trying to reach all the way over here. And in a game like DOA, I use the square button a lot, so it's a lot more comfortable for me to use this module than the 6-button module, where I have to keep my thumb at a stretched position for long periods of time, and that's just super uncomfortable. If you're playing fighting games that does not require 6 buttons, I totally recommend this guy over the 6-button fight pad module. Let's talk about the joysticks for a little bit. These are concaved with a lip here, so that's nice. Your finger is not going to slip off them. Actually, the tension is pretty heavy on these sticks. So if you like that, then these are the controllers for you. Now let's move on to the shoulder buttons. As you can see, these guys protrude out quite a bit. Just look how tall this button is. Unlike the Xbox Series controller where the shoulder button is tapered down, what this does is it prevents accidental input. This controller does not have a taper, so I accidentally taunt people all the time when I try to access the left trigger. As you can see here, when you're trying to access the triggers, your knuckles gonna be right on top of the shoulder buttons. You're gonna accidentally hit these guys a lot. And speaking of the triggers, these guys are huge. Look at this. They're ginormous. And this guy has trigger stops. There's 5 levels of it. To adjust it, there's this clutch mechanism here. What you do is you press and hold it. Then you press it to your desired position. So I'm gonna go all the way and then let go. The lowest trigger position you would think would be good for fighting games, but unfortunately these guys are so sensitive and they protrude out so much that I accidentally hit them all the time. Any slight touch to these guys, your move's gonna get triggered. I find it easier to play with the trigger being all the way down like this to prevent accidental inputs. We also have the 4 back buttons here. They're kind of built into the handles of the controller. I like this design a lot actually. This way they're not loose and they don't fall apart and they fall all over the place like with paddles. They're just built right in. And fortunately they're really good. They're very clicky and responsive. You can map these by pressing this button and holding one of these at the same time. So for example, I'm going to program this guy right here to up. Press and hold both buttons. Right, you're going to see the light blink here. And then I'm going to go up. So now this button's up. Look at that. Or you can also program these through the Victrix control app. However, the app doesn't work for me. I've heard that at the time of this recording, the program is not compatible just yet. But here's my issue. Then why release this controller if the app doesn't work for the controller yet? If the app works for you, please let me know what I'm doing wrong here. Let's talk about the D-pad now. You can actually switch these positions. Personally, I prefer the D-pad to be up here. I feel that this area is a lot more comfortable than down here, like on the Xbox. If you prefer the D-pad to be down here and the sticks up here, you can switch it around. This would be good for first-person shooters. We'll start with a cross-shaped D-pad. It's not as clicky as the buttons. These buttons are really tactile. Not so much the case with these. They feel a little mushy, to tell you the truth, but responsive nonetheless. Double taps work great. Diagonals are good except for one direction, which is forward up. And the reason being is the cross shape is really skinny, so the gap is pretty big. So unless you have really fat thumbs, when you want to do forward up, either it's going to be just forward or up. Motion inputs is pretty good. The surface of this D-pad is not the smoothest, but it's not bad. You can definitely do motion inputs with this guy. And this controller comes with 3 D-pads. You can take them out by simply yanking it off. Here's what it looks like with the D-pad off. And to replace it, simply push it back in. This guy is more of a hybrid D-pad, right? So it's like a disc, but with a cross-shaped cutout. Initially, you would think this would make doing diagonals a lot easier, right? Because they're connected. Unfortunately, that's not the case. This is actually worse when it comes to diagonals than the cross-shaped D-pad. If you want to do a diagonal, you really have to press in this area here for it to activate. If you're slightly off angle, it's gonna just do up or forward. I've played with it for a pretty long period of time, and diagonal is just not good on this guy. In the heat of battle, you're not gonna be able to dig your thumb inside these crevices here just to do a diagonal movement. This hybrid looking D-pad is probably better for retro games or games that doesn't require you to do a lot of diagonals. It is good with motion inputs. However, the edges on this guy is super sharp. Look at this. It's gonna carve your thumb away. This D-pad is really uncomfortable to use. And finally, we've got this diamond-shaped D-pad here. It's kind of like a disc, but in the shape of a diamond. Even though it looks kind of funky, this is the best of the bunch for fighting games. Diagonals are really good. The reason why diagonals are good on this guy is because there's no gap here on the edges. So if you want to do forward up, it's so easy to do. Look at that. No trouble at all. I find this D-pad to be really accurate if you use it on the edge. So for example, if you want to do down back, you put your thumb here and you can feel it. If you want to do back, just put it right here. You can really feel the corners here when you do a normal direction. And because this is a disc, motion inputs is super easy to do on this controller. This D-pad is awesome for all sorts of fighting games, 2D or 3D. This shape inherently is just great for fighting games because it solves a lot of issues. No gaps here, and you can really feel your way around the edges. And you have a smooth surface here to do motion inputs. Out of the 3 designs, this diamond-shaped D-pad is the best. Alright, the results are in for the input lag test for the Victrix Pro BFG. On wireless, minimum we get 1.41, maximum 15.88. Now let's compare that to wired, where the minimum input delay is going to be 6.7 and then maximum 7.99. And this is interesting because the minimum and the maximum is very close. You see that? However, on wireless, it's kind of all over the place. The range is really far apart. It just shows you that on wired, you're going to get a more consistent performance. In terms of average input delay, it's essentially the same. 7.72 versus 7.7. Polling rate, also essentially the same. 129.37 versus 129.7. Whether you're on wired or wireless, the performance is essentially the same. But if you want more consistency, I recommend going wired. So overall, do I think it's good for fighting games? The answer is yes. However, I can't shake the feeling of disappointment just because this controller could have been so much better. Hopefully the next version they'll go magnetic instead of screws, and that's gonna solve a lot of issues I have with this controller. If you're on PC, I think there's a lot better options out there, especially when you consider the price. But if you're only gaming on the PS5 and you gotta deal with the DualSense D-pad, this is actually a significant upgrade in my opinion. This D-pad here is so much better than the DualSense D-pad. Unfortunately, PS5 players do not have many options right now, and this is one of the better options out there for fighting games. Alright, that's going to be it for me. Hopefully you found this video to be helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and take care now.